Hey students, welcome to another hot topic discussion about culture. This is part two of our culture lecture series. We've talked about values and the 5 value orientations that structure the values, the things that we care about. Now we're going to kind of pull it all together and talk about this sort of building block of culture, which is after values, then we want to talk about norms. So this conversation is all about norms. You ready to talk about norms? All right. This discussion of norms is brought to you by El Papa, the Pope. This is my papal coffee cup from when the Pope was in Mexico, in Morelia. Okay, so we're going to talk about norms. We're defining norms. This is your textbook definition of norms. Norms are guidelines for behavior that is socially appropriate. Guidelines for behavior that is socially appropriate. It's the rules of society. They are sort of what guides our behavior on many levels. So we're going to talk about sort of the 3 levels of norms. But the starting point of this conversation is really important. This is going to relate to assignment number 2 that you're going to have, either you have or will have soon. And this is really important. You ready? Norms are manifestations of values. Norms are manifestations of values. We start with values, and then I'm recording this 4 years after all the COVID videos I recorded, and I promise I did have COVID for a little bit, but I don't have it now. It's just seasonal allergies. Maybe the Pope will help me. That norms are manifestations of values, and they come from the things that we care about. So, for example, if we care, we talked about privacy being a very important value. We have a lot of rules around privacy, what we share with our fellow people, including what we share online. You know, this idea of keeping your financial information private. We value privacy, keeping your sex life private, sometimes keeping your political or religious views private. There are certain norms about that. When you meet someone, you just don't say, well, what's your religious orientation? Where are you on the political spectrum? Right? We have a norm against that. And some norms that we have are things to do. Open the door for someone, to be polite. Cover your mouth when you sneeze. And some are norms about things not to do. Don't swear in front of children, or other people for that matter. So some norms are proscriptive and some norms are rescriptive. Some norms want you to do something, tip your bartender, and some norms want you to restrict from doing something, like being sexist, for example. That would be a good restrictive norm. Please don't be sexist, people. Especially, not even especially, just ever. But especially in front of, women who might be traumatized by you being sexist in front of them. So these are these different types of norms. And the important piece of this is that norms are manifestations of values. Okay, so let's get into this. We'll talk about 3 levels of norms. The first level of norms are what we call folkways. Folkways are guides for daily behavior. And we can think of folkways around a lot of different things. Sometimes we think of folkways as sort of manners. How you behave in a polite situation. What's the etiquette in this situation? What are the norms? There is a whole world of silverware that I didn't know about growing up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. I thought you got a knife, fork, and a spoon. And if you go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, you get a spork. But there's a whole bunch of different types of forks. I didn't know this. I was at a wedding in Long Island, a very bougie wedding, and there are all these different types of forks laid out. The dessert fork, the dinner fork, the cocktail weenie fork. I mean, I'm like, where are all these forks? I just need one fork. You got to have your salad fork different from your dinner fork. It's just very confusing. And so sometimes we think of folkways as manners or etiquette, and they can revolve around certain things like greetings. How we greet each other varies from culture to culture. In America, the folkway is, hi, how you doing? Shake my hand for 2 seconds, and the answer is, I'm fine. Right? Because we value time. We don't want people to actually answer the question, how you doing? Because you might be there all day. Because I got a lot going on in my life. And if you really want to know how I'm doing, we got some talking to do. But because we value our personal time, the norm is, how you doing? Fine. In other cultures, greeting folkways are very different. I spent a lot of time, as I probably mentioned, in Gay Paris, in Paris. There's a lot of kissing on the cheeks when you meet someone. You know, you did that in the United States, you might get a call from the HR department. Other cultures, including in Russia, men will kiss on the lips. I'm upstairs, Cozy. This is where I edit my child out of this video. Poof, my child is gone. Sorry for that interruption. It's like a different day or something. That must have been a big interruption. So we're talking about folkways and greeting customs. And so, if you think about bowing in Japan versus shaking hands in the United States, you get a lot of ideas about different types of folkways around greetings. There is a lot of folkways around holidays. The way we share our time together, the way we spend time, is also guided by folkways. Think about trying to describe Halloween to someone who's not from the United States, or how we celebrate Christmas. I spent a Christmas in Prague, and like a lot of Catholic countries, Christmas Eve is much bigger than Christmas morning, and so all the celebration happens on Christmas Eve. And in Prague, the celebration of Christmas is you have a big carp dinner. Carp is like a bottom feeder fish, kind of like catfish down in the south. And the tradition in Prague was you keep a live carp in your bathtub, and on Christmas Eve you chop off its head and cook it for a Christmas Eve dinner. And then you go to midnight mass. Because a lot of people don't want to fish in their bathtub now, when you walk through the streets of Prague now on Christmas Eve, there are fishmongers, fish sellers, and they're just chopping heads off of carp right and left. I just never forget these roly-poly fish heads bouncing into the street as everybody was getting their Christmas Eve carp. But, our folkways are very different around the celebration of Christmas and Easter and all the holidays that we celebrate. The 4th of July, which is on, I can never remember the date that one is on. And so we have all these folkways. And again, these folkways are manifestations of the values that we have. And sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to figure out what the value is. We've got to put on our sociology cap and figure out what the value behind this particular norm is. One of the ways, because there are so many of these folkways, we don't think about them a lot. We just get accustomed to the custom, as they would say. It's just sort of normal if you think about the custom of riding an elevator, or the custom of going grocery shopping, or the custom of celebrating Arbor Day. Nobody celebrates Arbor Day anymore. You're supposed to plant a tree. The way we greet each other at a funeral versus greeting each other at a football game. High five. There are a lot of these. And there's this great sociologist named Howard Garfinkel who invented this way of kind of looking at these things. He called them breaching experiments. And what breaching experiments are sort of breaking of informal rules that show that there is a rule there in the first place. So if you imagine if you got on an elevator and you faced the other direction, people would be like, no, there's a rule, you're supposed to face this way. If somebody said, how you doing, and you started talking about, some health problem that you're having, you breaking the rule, and it exposes that there is a rule. And he would send his students out to break all these rules to then document what these rules were. And we'll probably talk about some examples of doing this in class where breaking those rules can be a lot of fun because there's just so many folkways that we follow. Okay. So that's our first order of norms. Second are mores. Mores. It looks like Moors, but it's French. Mores. And it is an easy way to remember mores is that there's a moral component to them. These are rules that we demand conformity to. There's some element of morality behind them. A lot of mores in our culture revolve around children, protecting children. You don't want to swear in front of children. You don't want to talk about sex in front of children. You don't want to fight in front of children. We really value sort of protecting the innocence of children because we value children. We value the innocence of children. That's the value. And so we don't talk about sex. I mean, I think about this as a kid, as someone who has a kid in the house. I got a 9-year-old. She's now 9, believe it or not, about to turn 10. And there's stuff, if I'm watching something on the news or I'm watching a movie that has some graphic stuff or I'm listening to some music. If I'm doing a hip hop ride on the Peloton, I'm like, oh no, I do not want to expose my child to this language. So I switch it to a punk pop ride. My least favorite genre of all the genres in the universe is punk pop. It's like a complete oxymoron. Give me polka over punk pop. So yeah, we want to protect children. We have a lot of mores around privacy. You know, speaking of protecting kids, a lot of things that we don't want to disclose. And one of the big mores that we, you know, there are plenty more. Another way of thinking more, by the way, is taboo. The notion of a taboo, like you cannot do that. One of the big mores that I always spend a lot of time talking about is not just a certain norm around privacy, but bathroom privacy. We demand this. Even though everybody poops, right now, the President of the United States, pooping. Your favorite supermodel, pooping. The person that you are most angry at in the world, pooping. And the person that you're most attracted to in the world, pooping. They're all pooping at some point in the next 24-hour period. If not, they should probably have a little coffee. We can't talk about it, right? We come up with nice little terms, taking a dump, doing a deuce, dropping the kids off at the pool, laying some cable, the mysterious number 2. Like, where did that ever come from? Who came up with what was number 1? Urination is number 1. Defecation is number 2. What about number 3? That would be vomiting. 4. Oozing sores. I mean, I don't know what Council of Elders came up with number 1 and number 2, but it's one of the ways that we don't talk about bodily functions. And toilet paper commercials with bears and soaking up the blue liquid. I mean, you're not going to get an honest toilet paper commercial anytime soon. They're getting a little bit better, but there's never going to be one that says, you know, our product scrapes fecal matter off your anus better than their product, and it holds up the proof. Like, that's just not going to happen. Don't hold your breath, because we have a huge, just Google image toilets around the world. You know, in much of the world, toilets are open and people just squat right next to each other. Here we have to have all this privacy. I mean, think about the public restroom. Think about even when you're at home and you need to do your business, you know, locking the door to the bathroom even though you live alone. Right? It's really, really a weird thing. We talk about strange and the familiar. When we talk about how we are afraid to talk about bodily functions, something that everybody does. Everybody does. Elvis died on the toilet, squeezing one out. King of rock and roll. Donald Trump died on the toilet, squeezing. Oh no, that hasn't happened yet. Sorry, that was a future vision. And so there is a moral component. Okay. The third, we're going through all 3 of these, folkways and mores. The third are laws. These are the norms that we encode, that we write down on the books. And when we think of laws, we think of things that we've written down in state laws and in federal laws. There's the laws against speeding. There's laws against murdering people. There's laws against paying hush money to porn stars to cover up campaign finance fraud. There are all these laws, you know what I've been doing today, that we write them down, and they're the laws of the land. But we can also talk about laws as institutional laws, not just the law of the state of Oregon or the federal government or the law of Portland, but the laws of the institutions that we belong to. You know, what are the laws of PCC? There's a written down rule about how many credits you need to graduate, right? There's a written down rule about what happens if you get caught cheating. Like, these things are written down within the institution of this college. So laws aren't just sort of the laws of the land that bring the wrath of the cops. They can be written down or encoded by any institution. Now, we've got all 3 of these, and you kind of look at them, and it feels like there is a continuum. Folkways, informal. How you doing? Fine. We shake hands. We tip 20%. Mores, still informal, but, you know, we really want you to follow them. I don't want to hear about your bowel movements, and I don't want you to talk about your bowel movements in front of my kid. And then laws, now we're into the formal deviance. You do this and you get a punishment. Generally, that's true. generally there is this continuum from informal to formal, but one of the things that you'll notice is that sometimes it's not a continuum. And a perfect example of this, and we use this example over and over and over again, is driving on the highway and paying attention to the speed limit. The speed limit, there's a law that says, if it's 55, that's the speed limit. And if you drive over 55, you're going to get a ticket. The Folkway is a little bit different, right? The Folkway on the highway is informally the norm is everybody's driving 65. In fact, if you're driving 55 on the 55, somebody might beep at you and tell you to get out of the way because you're going too damn slow. So the norm and the law and the Folkway are at odds with each other. Another example, and we'll probably spend a little bit more time talking about this, were the norms around sex laws. And the case of this case that keeps coming up, the case of Michael Hardwick in 1986, who was arrested in Georgia on sodomy charges. And sodomy, until the Supreme Court finally figured out what to do with it, in many states it was against the law. Sodomy includes oral sex, by the way. If you didn't know that, good news. You are a sodomite. But when we look at survey data on people who are engaged in consensual sex, sodomy, including oral sex, are normative. They're folkways. And if they're not, there needs to be a good consensual conversation about how to keep your partner happy. And that's all I'll say about that. And sort of the case of Michael Hardwick is this case of where there had to be a conversation nationally, like symbolic interactionist moment here. We had to get on the same page about what we mean when we talk about privacy and sexuality. All right. More about Michael Hardwick later. Okay, so we're building this block of culture. The third part, so the first part were the values we talked about in the last video, and the 5 value orientations that give us those values. Those values produce norms, folkways, mores, and laws. The third component are the sanctions. The sanctions are the ways that these norms are enforced in any culture. And sanctions kind of come in sort of 2 different forms, and they each have 2 parts each. So stick with me here. Maybe we'll do a 4-fold table. We'll do this in class. The first types of sanctions are what we would call positive sanctions or rewards. We want to reward people for following the rules. If you're a good kid and you follow the rules of your family, you'll get some pudding. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? Right? You'll get rewarded. In this house, Santa Claus is a great positive sanctioning agent. Hey, Santa's watching, and if you do your chores, you'll be rewarded on Christmas morning. A sanction could be something as nice, as informal as a smile. Hey, I mean, when I say something that I think is funny, and I get some smiles from students, I take that as a positive reward. If I'm trying to make a point that I think is kind of difficult, and I get some nods from students, I take that as a reward. Oh, I'm doing my job right. They're getting the information. That's a positive sanction. It's very informal, but it's a positive sanction. It's a reward. You can get rewards for following mores. Like, people will think you're a good person. I can trust my kid with them because they don't swear in front of children and play gangster rap. Which happened to me the other day when I was on a hip-hop Peloton ride, and I was like, oh God, I can't play this music in front of my child. And you can be rewarded, by following the law. I mean, I'm presuming maybe things have changed now in this new era we're in, but I'm presuming that people who break the law have a harder time getting elected to an office like the presidency than people that break the law. I mean, there's a large chunk of the population that believe that Trump is convicted on any of these crimes he's accused of. He's not suitable for high office. So we have rewards for following the rules. If you study, you read your textbook and your other book, and you come to class and you watch these videos, I will reward you with a good grade. Right? The other side of that are the punishments. If you break the rules, you're going to get punished. So if you don't study, you don't watch this video that you should be watching right now, and you're gonna get punished with a bad grade. So they can be, if you do something like break a folkway, that punishment might be a raised eyebrow, I wish I was like The Rock. Is that really good people's eyebrow? I can't do it. Some people are really good with the eyebrow. It could be shaking your head, rolling your eyes. That my kid is really good at that. I know I've done something wrong when I get her to roll her eyes. Can be shunning, especially if you break a moray. If you're, like a weirdo in the bathroom talking about your bowel movements, I'm going to back away slowly and not have anything to do with you. Because you violated a taboo. There's going to be a stigma associated with you when you walk out of that bathroom. That's the weirdo. That's the weirdo. Like, there'll be a whisper campaign and nobody's going to want to walk into the bathroom with you. Or you break a law and the punishment can be, a fine or a ticket or imprisonment. Or public service or something like that. So we have sanctions as rewards and punishments. But we also, as we're kind of describing them, are talking about informal rewards and punishments. An informal reward is a smile or a pat on the back, or a thumbs up. You did a great job, well done. An informal sanction would be, as someone who commuted a lot by bike when I was at Portland State, I was often sort of in conflict with people in cars who would veer their cars into the bike lane, and I would sanction them. And the sanction looked like this. Sit and spin, asshole. Although I was riding my bike, so it was more like this. That's a sanction. Or I could be like, hey, thanks, good job. Like, that's a positive informal sanction, negative informal sanction. We got that in our culture. The norms are different, right? In England, this would be this. I learned in Italy, this is okay in America. In Italy, this means asshole. I learned that in Florence in a very unfortunate way. So, but also we have formal sanctions. Like formal punishments, obviously going to jail, that's a formal sanction. Getting a ticket, that's a formal sanction. Getting the death penalty, right? That's a pretty formal sanction. But there can also be besides the formal punishments, formal rewards. A promotion. If you do all this stuff, you're going to get promoted. Having good grades. The formal reward is you get to graduate, right? You get to get the heck out of here with your degree. So we have this interesting mixture of informal and formal, positive and negative, all meant to keep us following the rules. And it's very complex. The informal mantra of sociology, it's complicated, honey. It's very complex. So, but we have this, and what we're going to talk about is how this all varies from culture to culture. This system that we have of values, the norms they produce, and the sanctions that enforce them look different all over the world. They look different all over America. They look different all over Oregon. The norms of Portland might be different than some of the norms in Hillsborough, or might be different than some of the norms in Pendleton, right? I mean, we can get incredible variation, and it's important to know what the local norms are. And this is what your second assignment is all going to be about, which I'm excited to share with you. Okay, that's that. Those are the building blocks of culture. In the next video, we're going to talk about where culture comes from. Where culture comes from. There's a lecture question coming up, I imagine, but I got to update this one video for you. All right. Be mindful of your culture, but we don't want to be ethnocentric and judge other cultures by the standard of ours, because ours is just our culture. So that's something else we're going to talk about, is ethnocentrism. All that's coming up. Stay tuned to Sociology TV.